Your skin barrier determines whether your complexion thrives or falls apart, yet most of us have no real idea what it actually does at the cellular level. The science is clear. A compromised barrier can accelerate water loss by up to 75%, triggering inflammation that undermines every other skincare effort you make. I'm Dr. Elena Voss, and today we're decoding the molecular reality behind barrier function. You're listening to Luxury Beauty on a Budget podcast. Quick note before we get started, everything you'll hear today, the research, the data, the script, all of it is human verified and written by real experts. The voice you're hearing right now, though, that's AI generated. Just wanted to be upfront about that. If you've been listening for a while, seriously, thank you. Your time matters, and I'm glad you're spending some of it here. If this is your first episode, welcome. You're in the right place if you want smart, science-backed beauty advice without the luxury price tag. We drop new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Today, we're breaking down skin barrier function, what it actually is, how it works, and how to fix it when things go wrong. Let's jump in. This lipid-rich interface is the difference between hydrated, resilient skin and chronic sensitivity, dehydration, and accelerated aging. Understanding what skin barrier function involves isn't about memorizing anatomy, it's about recognizing when yours is compromised and knowing exactly which ingredients will restore it. So, what is skin barrier function, really? It refers to the stratum corneum's ability to regulate water retention, prevent pathogen infiltration, and maintain structural integrity through a precise arrangement of lipids, proteins, and cellular architecture. The term describes both a physical structure and a biochemical process. The outermost layer of your epidermis, the stratum corneum, consists of 15 to 20 layers of corneocytes, which are dead skin cells, embedded in a lipid matrix. This brick and mortar arrangement is the physical manifestation of barrier function. The bricks are protein-dense keratinocytes, while the mortar is a precise 1:1:1 ratio of ceramides, cholesterol, and free fatty acids. Here's what the research confirms. When this lipid composition shifts even slightly, say to a 1:0.5:1 ratio, barrier integrity drops measurably. Studies published by the National Institutes of Health demonstrate that ceramide deficiency alone increases transepidermal water loss, or TEWL, by 40 to 60% within 48 hours. The term moisture barrier is used interchangeably, though it's somewhat misleading. The barrier doesn't just hold moisture, it actively regulates ion transport, pH balance, maintaining an acidic 4.5 to 5.5 surface, antimicrobial peptide production, and inflammatory mediator release. You're looking at a dynamic, metabolically active interface, not passive plastic wrap. When people ask, what is skin barrier function in practical terms, they're really asking, what keeps my skin from falling apart? The answer is this lipid-protein matrix working in concert with tight junctions, natural moisturizing factors, and acid mantle integrity. Now let's talk about how skin barrier function actually works. The mechanics operate at 3 distinct levels: structural, biochemical, and immunological. Starting with the structural layer. Corneocytes contain filaggrin-derived amino acids that aggregate keratin filaments into dense bundles. When filaggrin breaks down through genetic variation, inflammation, or environmental stress, it generates hygroscopic amino acids like urocanic acid and pyrrolidone carboxylic acid. These compounds constitute your natural moisturizing factor, accounting for up to 30% of the stratum corneum's water-binding capacity. The lipid lamellae between corneocytes organize into crystalline and liquid crystalline phases. This dual-phase structure is critical. The crystalline phase provides impermeability, while the liquid crystalline phase allows flexibility and ion exchange. Disrupt this organization, say with harsh surfactants that solubilize lipids, and you get simultaneous dehydration and rigidity. Corneodesmosins, the protein rivets connecting corneocytes, degrade in a controlled sequence during desquamation. Premature degradation from overexfoliation or protease activation creates microscopic gaps that leak water and emit irritants. Moving to the biochemical process, your skin maintains barrier function through continuous lipid synthesis in the stratum granulosum. Lamellar bodies, organelles packed with lipid precursors and hydrolytic enzymes, migrate to the uppermost granular layer and extrude their contents into intercellular spaces. These raw lipids then undergo enzymatic processing to form the mature barrier. This is where things get interesting from a formulation perspective. Topical ceramides must match endogenous structure to integrate properly. Ceramide NP, which is non-hydroxyphytosphingosine, and ceramide AP, alpha-hydroxyphytosphingosine, are the most abundant in human skin. Generic ceramide complex listings rarely specify which ceramides you're getting. That's a red flag for inefficacy. pH regulation is non-negotiable. The acid mantle at pH 4.5 to 5.5 activates lipid processing enzymes like beta-glucocerebroside and acidic sphingomyelin. Alkaline disruption from high pH cleansers or tap water, which sits at pH 7 to 8, inhibits these enzymes, slowing barrier repair by 30 to 50%, according to controlled studies. Then there's the immunological interface. Your barrier houses Langerhans cells and produces antimicrobial peptides like cathelicidins and beta-defensins that neutralize bacteria, fungi, and viruses before they penetrate. Compromised barrier function triggers mast cell degranulation and cytokine release, creating the inflammation permeability cycle that defines conditions like eczema and rosacea. Here's the clinical reality. Once barrier dysfunction initiates inflammation, you need targeted intervention. Inflammation depletes ceramides further through sphingomyelinase activation, creating a self-perpetuating cascade. This is why barrier-first skincare emphasizes lipid replenishment before introducing actives. So why does skin barrier function matter so much? Compromised barrier function manifests in very specific ways. You'll see chronic dehydration despite heavy moisturizer use, sensitivity to previously tolerated products, rough texture and visible flaking, persistent redness or flushing, and, paradoxically, increased breakouts because barrier dysfunction often triggers acne through inflammatory pathways. The economic reality is stark. People with impaired barriers spend 2 to 3 times more on skincare while achieving worse outcomes. They layer serums, oils, and occlusive creams, addressing symptoms while ignoring the root dysfunction. From an aging perspective, barrier impairment accelerates visible decline. Chronic low-grade inflammation, termed inflammaging, degrades collagen, impairs fibroblast function, and triggers matrix metalloproteinase activation. You're essentially fast-forwarding intrinsic aging processes. TEWL measurements provide objective assessment. Normal skin shows TEWL values of 5 to 10 grams per square meter per hour. Compromised barriers regularly exceed 15 to 20, with severe cases reaching 30 plus. This isn't academic. Every 5-point increase in TEWL correlates with measurable increases in fine lines, roughness, and sensitivity. The good news? Barrier restoration shows measurable improvement within 7 to 14 days when approached correctly. You're not attempting to reverse years of damage, you're re-establishing lipid organization and reducing inflammation. Not all barrier impairment presents identically. Recognizing your specific pattern informs treatment selection. Let's look at the different types of barrier dysfunction. First, lipid-deficient barrier. This is characterized by low ceramide and cholesterol levels, often genetic from filaggrin mutations or induced by overcleansing, retinoid use without proper buffering, or aging. Ceramide synthesis declines 40% between ages 30 and 60. You'll see tight, dehydrated texture, minimal oil production, and exaggerated response to temperature changes. Treatment priority here is direct lipid replacement with ceramide-dominant formulations. The best barrier repair creams under $30 analysis identifies products with verified ceramide percentages. You want 2 to 5% ceramide complex minimum, ideally with cholesterol and fatty acids in physiological ratios. Then there's inflammation-driven barrier impairment. This is triggered by immune activation from allergens, irritants, UV exposure, or microbiome disruption. It's common in rosacea, perioral dermatitis, and stress-induced flares. Presentation includes redness, heat sensation, reactivity to multiple products, and stinging with water contact. Treatment priority is anti-inflammatory intervention before lipid replenishment. Ingredients like colloidal oatmeal containing avanthramides with documented anti-inflammatory activity, Centella asiatica, medacoside specifically, and niacinamide at 2 to 5% reduce cytokine expression while supporting barrier lipid synthesis. Mechanical or enzymatic disruption results from overexfoliation, aggressive device use, or enzyme dysregulation. The acid-loving crowd ends up here, using glycolic acid daily, retinoids nightly, and vitamin C serums in the morning without adequate barrier support. You'll see a shiny, taut appearance, what people call the overexfoliated glow, increased sensitivity, and paradoxical texture issues as desquamation outpaces barrier repair. Treatment priority is complete active cessation for 2 to 4 weeks while focusing on occlusive protection and lipid replenishment. This is where patience separates effective protocols from chronic damage. Finally, age-related barrier decline. Natural reduction in lipid synthesis, natural moisturizing factor production, and cell turnover creates thinner, more permeable barriers. It's not pathological, but it requires adjusted maintenance. Presentation is generalized dryness, slower healing, and increased TEWL measurements compared to earlier decades. Treatment priority involves bioregenerative skincare approaches that support ceramide synthesis through niacinamide, stimulate filaggrin expression with certain peptides, and provide exogenous lipids. This isn't about anti-aging, it's about supporting declining endogenous production. Now let's get into protecting and restoring barrier function. Effective barrier intervention follows a specific hierarchy. Cease damage, reduce inflammation, replenish lipids, maintain integrity. Starting with ingredient-level strategy. Ceramide formulations must specify types and ideally percentages. Look for ceramide NP, also called ceramide 3, ceramide AP, which is ceramide 6-2, and ceramide EOP, ceramide 1. All three appear in CeraVe moisturizing cream formulations, manufactured in the U.S. with consistent quality control, which explains that brand's efficacy despite drugstore pricing. Check the link below to see the current price. At around $14 to $18 for 12 ounces of the moisturizing cream, you're getting verified ceramide complex at functional concentrations, roughly $1.16 to $1.50 per ounce, compared to $8 to $12 per ounce for prestige alternatives with identical ceramide profiles. Cholesterol rarely appears on ingredient lists, despite being equally critical. When it does, usually as cholesterol near the middle of the ingredient deck, it signals formulation sophistication. Stracia liquid gold,
check the link below to see the current price, around $24 for 2 ounces, explicitly formulates the 1-to-1-to-1 ratio of ceramide to cholesterol to fatty acid at approximately 4% total lipid complex. Fatty acids should include palmitic acid, stearic acid, and linoleic acid. Evening primrose oil and sunflower seed oil naturally provide gamma-linoleic acid, which supports ceramide synthesis.
Niacinamide at 2 to 5% upregulates ceramide production through serine palmitoyl transferase activation. You're not just adding lipids externally, you're stimulating endogenous production. Olay Regenerist Microsculpting Cream, check the link below to see the current price, around $25 to $30 for 1.7 ounces, U.S. manufactured, contains approximately 4% niacinamide alongside peptides, delivering measurable barrier improvement within 14 days based on clinical TEWL measurements. Here's the pH and cleansing reality. Your cleanser likely causes more barrier damage than any other product. Alkaline surfactants, sodium lauryl sulfate and sodium laureth sulfate at pH above 7 strip lipids and denature proteins. The squeaky clean sensation is lipid removal, exactly what you're trying to prevent. Switch to pH 5.5 to 6 cleansers with gentle surfactants like sodium coke oil isothianate, cocamidopropyl betaine, or decyl glucoside. The CeraVe Hydrating Cleanser, check the link below to see the current price, around $15 for 12 ounces at pH roughly 5.5, costs around $1.25 per ounce versus $6 to $8 per ounce for identical formulations sold under prestige labels. Post-cleansing pH recovery matters. Damaged barriers can take 2 to 4 hours to restore normal pH after alkaline exposure. A pH balancing toner, simple options include diluted apple cider vinegar at pH 4 to 5 or fermented essences like Kiku Masamune High Moist at around $13 for 16.9 ounces, accelerates normalization to under 30 minutes. Now, occlusive strategy. Occlusives reduce TEWL by forming a physical barrier. Petrolatum remains the gold standard, reducing water loss by 98% in controlled studies. No plant oil comes close. Even mineral-rich oils max out around 60 to 70% reduction. The resistance to petrolatum is aesthetic, not scientific. If texture is non-negotiable, squalane, which is hydrogenated squalene from olive or sugarcane, provides lighter occlusion with excellent spreadability. The Ordinary's 100% plant-derived squalane, around $8 for 1 ounce, offers pure ingredient access without markup. What should you avoid during barrier repair? Temporary cessation of retinoids, all forms including retinol, retinaldehyde, and tretinoin, exfoliating acids like AHAs, BHAs, and PHAs, vitamin C above 10%, L-ascorbic acid especially, and fragrance and essential oils, particularly sensitizing ones like lavender, citrus, and mint. This isn't permanent. Once barrier integrity restores, TEWL normalizes, sensitivity reduces, and hydration holds, you reintroduce actives gradually. But attempting to power through with retinoids during barrier crisis compounds damage exponentially. Let's address some frequently asked questions. What does skin barrier function actually do for your skin? It regulates transepidermal water loss to maintain hydration, prevents pathogen and allergen penetration, maintains acidic pH to support beneficial microbiota, and produces antimicrobial peptides that neutralize harmful microorganisms before they can cause infection or inflammation. How long does it take to repair damaged barrier function? Mild barrier damage typically shows measurable improvement within 7 to 14 days with appropriate lipid replenishment and irritant cessation. Severe barrier impairment from chronic overexfoliation or inflammatory conditions may require 4 to 8 weeks of dedicated intervention before TEWL measurements normalize and sensitivity reduces. Can you have oily skin and still have compromised barrier function?
Yes, barrier dysfunction and sebum production operate through separate mechanisms. You can simultaneously produce excess oil while experiencing lipid matrix disorganization in the stratum corneum, which explains why many acne-prone individuals experience dehydration, sensitivity, and inflammation despite visible oiliness. What percentage of ceramides do you need in a barrier repair product? Effective barrier repair formulations contain 2 to 5% total ceramide complex with multiple ceramide types, ideally ceramides NP, AP, and EOP, combined with cholesterol and free fatty acids in approximately 1 to 1 to 1 ratios to match endogenous lipid composition and facilitate proper lamellar organization. Does drinking more water improve skin barrier function? Increasing water intake does not directly improve barrier function because skin hydration depends primarily on lipid matrix integrity and natural moisturizing factor content in the stratum corneum, not systemic hydration. Barrier restoration requires topical lipid replenishment and reduction of transepidermal water loss through occlusive protection. So, to wrap up the key points, what is skin barrier function beyond abstract dermatology? It's the measurable difference between skin that holds hydration, resists irritation, and ages gracefully versus complexions trapped in chronic sensitivity and accelerated decline. The lipid matrix arrangement, natural moisturizing factor content, and pH regulation determine whether your skincare investments deliver results or simply address symptoms of underlying dysfunction. The path forward is straightforward. Identify your specific barrier dysfunction pattern, cease inflammatory triggers, replenish ceramides in physiological ratios, maintain appropriate pH, and provide occlusive protection while repair progresses. This isn't about expensive formulations. Drugstore options with verified ceramide percentages outperform prestige creams that prioritize texture over functional lipid delivery. Barrier restoration measurably improves within 2 weeks when approached with ingredient precision. Skip the botanical extracts and focus on the molecular reality: ceramides, cholesterol, fatty acids, niacinamide, and strategic occlusion. Your barrier will respond to chemistry, not marketing claims. Thanks for listening to this episode of Luxury Beauty on a Budget podcast. New episodes come out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so there's always something fresh waiting for you. If you found this one useful, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star rating and a quick review. It sounds small, but it actually makes a huge difference in helping other people discover the show. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe or follow so you get notified the second a new episode drops. Talk soon!